Well, it's been 2 years and the How to Train Your Dragon remake is finally out. The animated classic is one of the very few movies that I would call a masterpiece. It does just about everything right, and it was really one of the pioneers of the action animation genre. It was my favorite movie as a child. Throughout the last 15 years, the IP has earned kids' shows, a couple of sequels, and then after all that was exhausted, after whatever the hell this movie was, it was finally time for DreamWorks to conform to the rest of Hollywood and make their debut live action remake. There's different kinds of remakes. There's remakes that are more just adaptations of source material. There's faithful remakes that try to change the story a little bit. And then there's remakes that just are glorified remasters. This remake definitely falls into the latter category, which is supposed to be the easiest category, but with this remake, it's just abundantly clear that DreamWorks does not know what they are doing. So just a quick disclaimer, I'm going to be coming down really hard on this remake, not because the original is my favorite childhood movie or anything, but because I would rate the original movie as a masterpiece if I were to review it today. I also want to make clear too that I don't think this movie should have been remade at all, because how do you make significant improvements upon a masterpiece to the point where millions of dollars are worth the risk? So some of my criticisms may seem a bit nitpicky or pedantic, considering that it's a live action remake of a somewhat melodramatic animated film from 15 years ago, but I don't really care because Lilo and Stitch managed to do it last month, so I just don't buy into the excuses made for this movie. Also, I think it goes without saying that I'll be talking spoilers. This is more of a review of contrast rather than a general review of a movie. So if you haven't seen the original, just do yourself a favor and go see it. Otherwise, skip to this time in the video for my final verdict spoiler free. The biggest sin of this movie by far is easily the dialogue. And I know that's going to shock some people, but don't worry, I'll get to the other thing because I understand that that's pretty much where most of the controversy in this movie lies. DreamWorks has been known for how good their dialogue and voice casting is. Why do you think the movie Shrek, the Bee Movie, and Kung Fu Panda have been memed into oblivion? It's because the characters' ability to entertain us, make us laugh, and relate to them was way ahead of its time. The dialogue in this piece of shit is so diluted that it was genuinely distracting because of how frustrating it was. It's not that the dialogue is bad or anything, the dialogue is really good because it's plagiarized essentially. It's just the delivery of it is so dull. So like just for an example, there's one scene in the original movie where Gobber takes shots at Hiccup for his appearance and Hiccup says, "There will be consequences," but in the remake, he's just like, "There will be consequences." What they're doing is they're trying way too hard to take a transcript of the original dialogue and then just make it more realistic based on what they're reading, instead of actually sitting down and listening to the dialogue from the original movie and understanding why it worked. They can say that they studied these characters all they wanted, but I'm sorry, I don't believe you. They also delete sequences of dialogue. You remember that monologue that Hiccup goes on where he's pretending to be his dad? You know, one of the most comical moments of the 2010 film? Completely gone. Some of the dialogue is just straight up cringe. At one point, Astrid says she won't snitch on Hiccup. Yeah, in 11th century Scotland or Iceland or whatever, the kids are using modern slang. I'm sure the studio doubled their profits from kids getting their parents to go see this movie a second time. Overall, it was just severely questionable, and instead of it actually being realistic, it comes off fake, boring, and most of all, just drowsy. It was almost suggestive rather than decisive. The characters' lines had no emphasis behind them, which just made for a really forgettable experience. Hiccup, obviously being the main character of this movie, suffers the worst from this shitty dialogue. Now, Mason Thames, the guy playing Hiccup, is an amazing actor. He was fantastic in The Black Phone, so I know he's capable, but for one particular reason that I'll get to way later in the video, he just doesn't sell his own version of Hiccup. Again, I just don't think it's possible to recreate Jay Baruchel's Hiccup. He was able to make him seem like a little bit of a dork and a loser because of the way he sounded. Again, just going back to DreamWorks' excellent ability to cast voice actors. Mason Thames only really captures that loser element, and it's really only because of the characters around him that he seems like a loser instead of him actually being able to sell it himself. Otherwise, there's really not much to say about Hiccup. They don't improve upon him, obviously, but they don't really change him either, at least. He was just as forgettable as the movie was. Then, of course, we have the elephant in the room, which is Nico Parker as Astrid. So this is 2 times now that Nico Parker has race swapped a beloved character from a classic piece of narrative art. I thought DreamWorks was above all the wokeness and the race swapping. Maybe it's just Universal Studios talking, probably, but I just don't see how changing a character that's been well established over hours of content is in any way going to widely benefit the studio. Did they have nothing to learn from Ariel and Snow White? Now, you can sell me on a good race swapped character, but only as long as their actor's ability to capture their counterparts' character traits overshadows their aesthetic differences. I'll give you 3 good examples. Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, Jamie Foxx as Electro, and then I might as well just bring it up now, Julian Dennison as Fishlegs in this movie. It's clear that all these people were chosen for these roles because of their acting ability and not because of their skin color. I cannot say the same for Nico Parker. Astrid was remembered for how feisty and tough she was, despite the fact that she had such a frail figure, and America Ferrera, as annoying as she is, has that assertiveness and raspiness to her tone that made Astrid so gritty. Also, the way she dressed just looked tough. She had those tattered clothes and the skulls on her outfit. She had sort of that punk style costume that gave her a sense of femininity while also making her look like a warrior. Nico Parker's face just looks way more delicate. She doesn't have that same tone of voice that America Ferrera has, and one of the things that killed my immersion was the fact that she magically changes height throughout the movie. The scene where she kisses Hiccup on the cheek, they put her on a stool for that scene, and I'm not joking about that. They also established at the beginning that Astrid is the captain of the cool kids. This was just cringe. In the original, it was just kind of an unspoken fact that Astrid was the one that all the kids looked up to, but I guess they just thought the audience didn't realize that shit 15 years ago. As far as her chemistry with Hiccup goes, it's just not there. I am not sold. First of all, they add unnecessary hostility between the two in probably the worst scene of the whole movie. In the original, she didn't want anything to do with him. She didn't care about him, at least not until he got in her way of winning that recruit training tournament or whatever. Hiccup turns their war with the dragons into an issue of colonialism. Jesus Christ. And then Astrid says some bullshit about he's privileged, she comes from nothing, and then she says, I'm gonna be chief one day. That has never been an objective of Astrid's. All she wanted to do was just become a warrior. In fact, in the second movie, when the idea of Hiccup becoming chief comes up, she's like super excited and proud for him. And it's just scenes like this where you know it's bullshit because they never address it again. They never bring it up. It has no implication in the plot whatsoever. It's just pointless political filler. Anyways, the moment we first see Astrid is messed up too. In the original, she's got like a fireball just erupting around her and Hiccup's being a gooner for it. But in the remake, she just walks through a small cloud of smoke and then Hiccup's just sitting there smiling. It's kind of a poetic analogy for how much effort was put into this movie. The scene where Hiccup leads the recruits into the final battle is changed so that Hiccup relinquishes his command to Astrid, which is fucking stupid. The whole mission was his idea, and I think originally Astrid was the one encouraging him to come up with a plan. This is just dumb. The scene where they kiss at the end actually isn't that bad, but there's just a slight problem with it. Nico Parker was 19 and Mason Thames was 16 at the time. This is just a rough approximation. I personally don't have too much of a problem with this instance in particular. I think we're all mature enough to know that they're actors just doing a job, but I just don't want to see this becoming normal in Hollywood. Then we have Toothless, who's a bit more complicated. Again, I think he's a character who should just stay animated. For me, I don't really know why, but I just wasn't sold on Toothless, and I think the main 3 reasons why this might be is because 1, he just seems more like a reptile than a cat, which, I mean, I guess is fine. He is a dragon, but it's just like the whole point of Toothless was that he was basically a cat. And number 2, he's not that quick. He seems more like an animatronic than the fastest dragon known to Vikings. In the original movie, when Hiccup cuts Toothless free, Toothless, in an instant, in the blink of an eye, at the speed of light, he goes from all tied up and shit to just like that, pinning Hiccup against that rock. It was like the scariest thing. Just scary enough to where I wouldn't cry in the movie theaters as a 7-year-old, but it was like the scariest thing I had ever seen. It was perfect. But in the remake, Hiccup just kind of scoots back a little bit, and then Toothless just kind of playfully chases after him. And number 3, they robbed Toothless of so many moments that gave him personality. Like, the scene where he sits down after Hiccup kicks the knife away, that's gone. The test drive scene, which they mess up in a few different ways, just to get sidetracked a little bit. The sequence of events in the original movie leading up to the test drive scene were supposed to show Hiccup learning about dragons and also learning from his mistakes, kind of like Tony Stark. And then when he felt comfortable, that's when he decided he wanted to test drive Toothless. But in this movie, they do a preemptive test drive before the actual test drive, purely just so that they could add more special effects and then drag the movie out by just another 120 seconds. But anyways, the moment where Hiccup falls off of Toothless during the test drive scene, they didn't do that other cutesy moment where he's like trying to tell him what to do, but then Toothless just ends up spinning around. That's gone. One of the biggest fuck-ups of this movie is the not so fireproof scene. That scene is completely gone. Now, to some people this might not seem like an important scene, but it's one of the most important scenes in the movie because, first of all, it gives Toothless more personality. Second of all, it gives Hiccup a heartwarming moment with one of the cute little terrible terrors, but most importantly, it sets up the ending of the movie. In the remake, how the hell does Hiccup know that dragons aren't fireproof on the inside if that scene doesn't happen? I would not be surprised at all if one of the reasons that they cut this scene is because they had trouble in post making it look like Mason Thames was actually leaning against Toothless. I'll get into all the CGI trouble later on. Now, they do some of the cute moments with Toothless, like where Hiccup chases him with the saddle. Like, they did that just fine, but it's those little moments that were meticulously put in the original to win the audience over that were just missing. There's many more smaller instances like this, and then there's scenes where they try to give Toothless personality, but they just really hold back on it. And then there's other problems, like Toothless doesn't have as much emphasis on his facial expressions. Stoic they just kind of shit on in this movie. He's supposed to be the chief of the tribe, but he hardly makes any decisions. During the war room scene, all of his subordinates are like laughing at him and just totally undermining his authority. Then he just starts complimenting them. All the people he complimented, by the way, were women who looked like they would crumble like a crouton under a 50-pound bag of fertilizer. 2 of the women that he complimented came from faraway lands like China, supposedly, and Africa. This is supposed to be like the justification for all the diversity you're gonna see in this movie. And you know what? That's fine. I'll accept that. On one condition, I want to see some white Wakandans in the next Black Panther movie, but we all know how that's going to go. He doesn't even make the final decision to go find the dragon's nest. He ends up consulting Gothy, who they changed from this wise elder into this voodoo-looking lady. Now, maybe this is just something in Viking culture, but even still, they changed her character, and they just made it seem like they rely more on superstition or spirituality rather than actual competent leadership. And again, it just totally humiliates Stoic. What's the point of you even being the chief of the tribe if you're just gonna let everyone walk all over you and you're not even gonna make any of the decisions? It felt like this movie was just rewritten by children who have no sense of authority or respect for leadership. They turned Gobber British and fucking boring. His original character was remembered for how thick his Scottish accent was and how goofy his animated character looked, but in the remake, he's British and his personality is so diluted. As far as the other characters go, again, Fishlegs was great casting. I don't know, maybe he could have had a little more energy, but probably wasn't his fault. Snotlout was also really good, but the guy they cast to play him just had kind of a higher pitched voice, but otherwise he did a good job. The twins, Rough Nut and Tough Nut, Tough is fine in his own right. I just feel like movies with TJ Miller in them should not be remade at all, unless it's like Cloverfield or something. And then Rough is played by this person. I won't say too much about this, but at least they had the sense to make a joke about the irony of them being twins. They also removed the part where Roughnut flirts with Hiccup, which was originally supposed to be service for all the parents who took their kids to see this movie, but fuck them, I guess. In terms of other scenes that they just fucked up or changed for the worse, the scene where Hiccup is about to stab Toothless is rushed to shit. It carried no emotional weight at all. The scene where Stoic disowns Hiccup doesn't have the same intimate cinematography where the framing is a lot more direct, so that kind of took some of the emotion out of it. As far as production goes, it's just sloppy. Starting with the VFX, it just looked more like it was animated and not CGI. It just looked like cartoon special effects. One thing you'll notice is that they take shortcuts with the VFX because they're clearly having trouble bridging the gap between computer imagery and actual people. A good example would be the scene where Hiccup feeds Toothless the fish for the first time. You don't actually see Toothless snatch it out of his hand like you could in the original. Hiccup's body sort of just covers the whole thing, and then Toothless's swift motion just sort of makes it easier for the fish to just end up in his mouth rather than him actually snatching it out of Hiccup's hand. So just things like that. If the CGI isn't hidden, it's just super lazy, like the scene where Fishlegs gets his shield blasted out of his hand by the Gronkle. It almost looked like he threw the shield. And when the CGI isn't lazy, it's just super hesitant. Again, I would cite the scene where Hiccup and Toothless meet for the first time. All of the other dragons besides Toothless look realistic yet still amazing, especially the monstrous Nightmare. I also like how they made the Terrible Terror into a chameleon. I thought that was really cute and innovative. The editing in this movie is actually surprisingly notable. I don't think I've ever mentioned editing in any of my previous reviews because I just feel like editing is not that hard for someone who has like at least 100 hours of experience. I mean, my editing isn't perfect, but if you look at some of my first videos just from a few months ago, my editing was horrible. So I would just like to think that at this point in time, I've gotten to the point where I can put together a video where it feels like I'm continuously talking in a natural way, even though I do multiple takes. There are so many times I do not have enough fingers, toes, or just protruding bodily organs to count how many times in this movie a clip was dragged out or rushed. It just wreaked carnage on my immersion. And just in general too, there's entire scenes that are dragged out. Astrid's little mental case where she doesn't understand tribal monarchy, for example. And then there's entire scenes that are totally rushed. Once again, I cite the scene where Hiccup and Toothless meet for the first time. That shit was cooking. The production design and the props are decent, I guess, but there's just a lot of times when they look like plastic. One of the big selling points of this movie was the production design, but it just really didn't live up to the hype. So, what happened with this movie? You can't pin all the blame on one single person, but in this case, you can pin a lot of it on the director, Dean DeBlois. He directed the original movie, so credit to him for that, but it's clear that his skill only really lies in the animation realm. Just look at his portfolio. It's abundantly clear that he and DreamWorks just simply don't know how to make a movie with a live crew and live actors. The direction was so formal that it felt like the characters were told where they needed to stand rather than them ending up on their marks naturally. There was no natural flow with how each event unfolded. The worst instance is probably the Gronkle fight, which was originally just fast-paced enough to feel realistic while also accommodating the audience's relaxation and all that. When it's down to just Astrid and Hiccup, he says, "Oh, I guess it's just you and me, huh?" And she says, "Nope, just you," and immediately dodges the fireball, getting rocketed at her face, understandably so. But in the remake, instead of looking at the dragon that's shooting fireballs at them, she's looking over at the director, waiting for him to signal her. So when she says, "Nope, just you," for whatever fucking reason, she just stands there and pauses for a second before dodging it. The assault and battery committed against my immersion is just indescribable. I don't understand why they felt the need to bring back the OG director instead of someone who actually has experience directing a real-life crew and actors. If I have to give this movie credit for a small handful of things, the examples that I would give that are worth noting would include the scene where Hiccup eats the raw fish. Obviously, since it's real life, they're able to capture the disgustingness of it, so that was good. The scene where Hiccup draws Toothless was also really good, but I feel like this could have been accidental because I can absolutely see a scenario in which they wanted to drag this moment out and then just serendipitously achieved a more powerful moment. The one scene that I thought was pretty decent overall was the scene where Stoic gifts Hiccup his mother's titty armor or whatever. The acting was good, the pacing was smooth, and the direction was passable. It was just the one scene that they didn't really fuck up on in any notable way. They did the right thing and brought John Powell back to compose the score. What can I say? Great job. The only problems are that they changed the test drive scene for the worst, and the romantic flight scene isn't as glamorous. The auroran lights aren't as bright, and the music isn't as powerful. You can tell that they did put some effort into the costume design, but the makeup is just bizarre. Astrid looks like she's wearing a wig the whole time, and Gobber looks like he's got horsetails glued to his face. And I can already hear it. Oh, Your Honor, it's harder to adapt animated characters that look that way. I don't care. They wanted to do a remake, now they have to sell it to me. This doesn't do it. Otherwise, this film is messier than the aftermath of a robbery at a gas station in a stand your ground state. It's extremely dragged out, but it feels rushed a lot of times. The material is super hesitant and diluted, and there's just very minimal moments that they actually get right. But that was How to Train Your Dragon. More like How to Shit on My Childhood. Okay. For my final verdict, I'll be ruling against this slop at 44%. This one just made me sad. I mean, this movie had no chance of getting it right, but I just can't believe how much they fucked up. This is a pretty late review, so you probably already saw it or just already didn't, but if you were somehow waiting for my suggestion, then I would say don't go see this, but it's just also sad because I wouldn't suggest watching it either because it really doesn't do the original any justice. Anyways, that's all for today. 2025 is just ruining my childhood. I could talk for hours about all the things that this movie gets wrong, but I'll spare you guys. So if there's anything that I missed that you noticed, please do leave it in the comments so that I can address it. But that's all for this case. This court is adjourned.